CNN wants to teach you what socialism is. This video is awesome because it is just full of hypocrisy. Now, before we begin, I want to preface this video with this. I myself have gotten socialism wrong before. A few days ago, defined socialism to be when the government has control over the means of production. That is not what socialism is. Socialism is the social ownership of the means of production. And when I released that video and made that mistake, I had a bunch of socialists respond to me, and they told me where to go to find the actual definitions of these various terms. Now, I only have 180 subscribers, and so I can admit to being naive, I can admit to making a mistake, and I can correct my mistake with this video that I'm releasing to you guys right now. But understand this, CNN has millions of viewers. These guys have no excuse. When they make a mistake like this, when they screw up throughout this video, like the way they do in this video, it's on purpose. It's intentional. They are trying to muddy the waters. And the fact that they call this reality check is a joke to me. So let's take a look at this video, and then we're going to make fun of them, and then we're going to go over the various terms that we should know, like what is social democracy, democratic socialism, mixed economies, capitalism, democracy, communism, socialism. We're going to understand all these things by the end of this video. So let's watch this video first, and then we'll talk about it.
You know what shouldn't be a tough question for someone running for president? It's this. Are you a capitalist? It's a layup, basic stuff, rooted in American history and culture. And yet, Democratic candidates seem to get spun around the axle on this one. And in the process, only helping Donald Trump's reelection. Exhibit A is John Hickenlooper, entrepreneur who bounced back from a layoff to launch a pioneering brew pub, going on to become mayor of Denver and eventually two-term governor of Colorado. And yet, when Joe Scarborough gave him 3 chances to answer the question, he whiffed 3 times.
Would you call yourself a proud capitalist? Oh, I don't know. Again, the labels, I'm not sure any of them fit. Do you consider yourself a capitalist? Well, again, the labels, I'm a small business person. Do you consider yourself a capitalist, and does capitalism work? Well, I think I don't look at myself with a label.
Look, I co-founded a group called No Labels a while ago, but that's ridiculous. Hickenlooper seemed afraid of angering Bernie bros and social media mobs, but the man was a centrist Democratic governor. He helped flip a red state blue. It's the basis of his campaign, and it's nothing to apologize for. But Hickenlooper's not the only one.
So what about capitalism? Are you a capitalist?
See, here's the thing with all these labels and as you said, how they're used to define people and where they're coming from. But as you see, so many of these labels are misused, misunderstood to the point
so how would you define
where people
yourself?
Don't have any idea what they even mean anymore.
Actually, Tulsi Gabbard may have a point there. According to Gallup, only 17% of Americans define socialism correctly, the government ownership of the means of production. That's half the number who could define it properly at the start of the Cold War. And get this, today, 6% of Americans believe socialism means being social and getting along with people. About a quarter can't say what it means at all. But Americans know what capitalism is. After America's basically been a liberal capitalist democracy since our founding. We've had presidents who expanded the social safety net and others who expanded free markets, but it all exists within the framework of capitalism. And for all its flaws, it's been far more successful at expanding freedom and prosperity than any of the alternatives. Now, Democrats have often been accused of being socialists. It happened baselessly with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, and it's happening again today. Fox News has mentioned socialists or socialism nearly 1,800 times since October, according to transcripts. There's strategic feedback loop with the White House as well. Trump has used the term socialism or socialist more than 100 times during his presidency. And he clearly wants to label Democrats socialists in this election. And some Democrats seem determined to help him with this rebranding. But not every candidate is tying themselves up in knots over this.
I'm a capitalist. Come on. I believe in markets. What I don't believe in is theft. What I don't believe in is cheating. That's where the difference is.
That's not so hard, right? But Democrats who seem afraid of alienating some folks on the far, far left end up playing into Donald Trump's reelection playbook. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And that's your reality.
So let me go through the things that they totally messed up here. Number one, they defined socialism wrong. And so did Gallup, by the way. Gallup messed that up too. And then on top of that, they accused Fox News of using socialist too many times. Literally, CNN brought Bernie Sanders on, I think it was a few months ago, with a giant whiteboard and said, a lot of people are calling you a socialist. Are you a socialist? You're a socialist. And they keep framing every darn question on their town halls with, why do you prefer socialism over capitalism? It's absolutely insane that CNN is making fun of Fox News. They have no ground to stand on here. They completely muddy the waters with this video. And on top of that, they said that like the philosophies of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, AOC, they all fall in line in a capitalist framework. That's not how it works. Capitalism is within the framework of Elizabeth Warren's social democracy concept. And Bernie Sanders is also a social democrat, and so is AOC. Capitalism is part of that framework, but it's not like their agenda is part of the capitalism framework. So this guy is completely reversing everything intentionally. It's all on purpose. So let's go through the various definitions of that are being thrown around, the various terms, and let's give definitions. And I'm using Wikipedia and Investopedia as my resources to understand what these terms mean. And I know you might be saying like, wow, what a terrible resource or source to use. Get over it. It's not like I can use CNN, right? Like people look at CNN as a reliable source, but they don't look at Wikipedia as a reliable source. These, the various resources that I did use, however, they have a very common theme for all of these definitions. They're all varied just a little tiny bit, but they like, for example, with socialism, the definition is pretty much overwhelmingly social ownership of the means of production. And so when CNN comes on and says it's the government ownership of the means of production, that greatly distinguishes itself from the various resources like Wikipedia and Investopedia. So you have to understand that there is some commonality between the outside resources. I'm not going to be using CNN though. Understand that. CNN, this guy is honestly a joke. This guy, I can't believe that someone has the heart to go out there and muddy the waters like that. So let's start with socialism. Socialism is a social ownership of the means of production. What does social ownership mean? There are two versions. There's public ownership and cooperative ownership. They vary very slightly. Within the socialism framework, there is equal outcome. There is a goal for equal outcome. However, you sometimes have what are called surplus goods. And this is where things get a little fuzzy to me. It's hard to determine what to do with surplus goods. So for example, you have 50 people and you have 100 oranges. Socialism is when you give every person one orange because that's all those people really need. But then you have these 50 extra oranges. What do you do with them? Well, you can distribute them publicly like a social dividend, or you could, in theory, give those 50 oranges to a more local industry, maybe the people who made those oranges. And so like if you made excess stuff, you get excess stuff in return in a sense. That's where things get a little bit weird within the socialism definition. Communism is a very strange thing to me. I still quite don't understand it, and I'm going to admit naivete in that sense. Communists believe in socialism, but they also believe in a central government. That's kind of the thing that I've come about with my research. So you have this one central government that basically makes sure that socialism happens. That is my interpretation. Democracy. Not a lot of people mess this one up because we live in a democracy, kind of representative of democracy, and it's hardly representative at this point. Democracy means when people have say in the role of the government. Capitalism, this one's a very weird thing. Capitalism is an economic system that is 100% private, where it's the people who have, their own goods, and they're trading their own goods for other people's goods so that it's now their goods. So it's, most people understand capitalism, but it's important to understand that this economic system doesn't necessarily need to be global. So for example, anarcho-capitalism is basically, if you've ever played the game Rust, that's anarcho-capitalism. It's when there's there's capitalism at every layer of the private market. So there's no government intervention in capitalism. And so that's anarcho-capitalism. But you can, for example, believe in capitalism in local areas or in large areas. It very much depends. But for now, we'll stick with this definition. Capitalism is an economic system that is 100% private. We're going to use that in various definitions coming up here. A mixed economy is where some markets are left to capitalism and some markets are left to socialism. So keep in mind, socialism is the social ownership of the means of production. In this case, mixed economy is when you have some markets that are left to capitalism. So, for example, maybe the production of phones, those are left to capitalism. You know, that's 100% private. The government's not going to touch that in any way. But then you have some areas where the government gives or provides the produce, if you will, the product publicly. So, for example, universal health care would be a more social aspect of the market. I don't want to quite use socialism because universal health care isn't quite socialist. And let me explain what I mean by that. You only have a few doctors providing the goods for everyone. Whereas not everyone is necessarily contributing. And so some socialists might argue it's not quite socialist, but more or less it is socialist, in my view. From what I've picked up, universal healthcare, that aspect, that specific industry would be considered socialist. However, that being said, you have to also ask yourself, who is providing the healthcare? Is it the government that's providing the healthcare? Because when the government steps in, then it's no longer technically socialism. It starts to become a little bit communist. And so this is where the muddying of the waters comes into play. This is where things get a little weird. But I'm going to get back to mixed economy when I get into social democracy, because social democracy is the thing that I understand very clearly. Democratic socialists. Democratic socialists is someone who wants to, they want socialism as the end goal of their government. But they want to get there by democratic means. So, for example, we have people like if you go to Reddit and you find the socialism subreddit, those people are democratic socialists. Most of them, they want to achieve socialism by promoting socialism and telling people like, hey, be a socialist, vote for socialism. And so if democratic socialism wants to achieve socialism by democratic means, they are 100% socialists. Now, they don't want to force socialism, they want to vote on it. This last definition is the one that I really want you to understand, though. Social democracy, or a social democrat. This is someone who supports economic and social interventions, and that way you can think of it as a mixed economy, to promote social justice within democracy and capitalism. So capitalism and democracy play in the framework of social democracy. But the idea is you're trying to promote social justice. Are you trying to promote socialism? No, that's different. You're trying to promote social justice. So you're trying to promote equal opportunity, not equal outcome. That's where a social democrat and a socialist differ. Socialists want equal outcome of non-surplus goods. So any good that is not surplus, a socialist wants to immediately make a social dividend of that thing. They want to make that thing public, essentially. Whereas a social democrat, they want social justice where everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed in the free market. So in a sense, it's not a complete free market because the government is intervening in some way by making rules, by making sure that certain mergers don't happen, by making sure that certain greenhouse gases aren't emitted. So that in a sense is promoting social justice. But the way you're promoting social justice is with democracy. And so you still have capitalism within this framework, but the idea is you decide on how to promote social justice with a democracy. You have people voting on what people think is fair and right. So, for example, Bernie Sanders believes that universal health care should be a right. Therefore, that should be given to people as a social intervention. But it's still, in a sense, capitalist, where you have markets that are overwhelmingly 100% private. So, asking a social democrat, are you a capitalist or are you a socialist, is a very awkward question. And that's why this guy drives me nuts, is because he's criticizing people like Tulsi Gabbard for saying, I don't quite want to label myself as like a capitalist or a socialist. Like, that's an unfair question. And let me give you guys an analogy. Let me give you guys a couple analogies. Asking a social democrat if they're a capitalist or if they're a socialist is like asking a Mormon if they're Christian. It's kind of an awkward question. It's like, the answer is yes and no, right? It's like calling McDonald's a restaurant. I mean, in one regard it is, but it's kind of more like a fast food. It's like, so you have to understand that, yes, technically social democracy falls as a branch of capitalism. It's not in the framework of capitalism. Capitalism is in the framework of social democracy, but it's still in a sense capitalism, but you're trying to promote social justice at the same time. So yes, it's capitalist, but it's also socialist. It's kind of both. They have aspects of both ideologies within this. And that's why I think we need to understand frameworks. Social democracy is what they use is they use democracy and capitalism and socialism as aspects within a giant overarching framework of social democracy. So it's not like when they say that capitalism is involved, it's not to say that the whole thing is capitalist. It's that certain aspects of this philosophy are capitalist. Certain aspects are certain aspects of socialism. So you have certain aspects of socialism and certain aspects of social democracy. And so you can't quite say, are you a capitalist or are you a socialist? Because that's embedded in the overarching philosophy. So you have these capitalism, socialism, democracy. Those things are used to build larger philosophies like social democracy or democratic socialism or communism. So these are overarching philosophies that we have to understand that use capitalism and socialism and democracy embedded inside these philosophies. And that's where I think the muddying of the waters comes from. So shame on CNN for totally botching this segment. Give a like if you want to make fun of them.